You know what time it is? It's time to win with your boy EyeImposter and the Seyelent Assassin.
EyeImposter
And the Seyelent Assassin presents
Scary Stories. Grab a blanket and some popcorn and let's go!
The scratches in the closet.
Ever since Sarah was young, she always had a power she kept secret. Whatever she drew came true. Every day she'd play with her best friend Elizabeth. They'd play on magical creations that came straight from Sarah's imagination. But as the girls got older, they grew apart. Sarah threw herself deeper into painting while Elizabeth played sports and started hanging out with her friend Jessica more often. However, the two still maintained a tradition of meeting up in front of school and walking home together. Until one day, Sarah waited outside for Elizabeth, and Elizabeth never came. And then it happened again the next day. After days and days of Elizabeth not showing up, Sarah confronted her at school. "Why won't you walk home with me?" she asked. "I walk home with Jessica now. It's no big deal. Sometimes things change." Sarah cursed at Elizabeth and screamed hateful things. Heartbroken, she ran home. She grabbed an old drawing of the two of them and tore it in half. The next day at school, when Sarah went to apologize to Elizabeth, Elizabeth didn't recognize her. She simply looked at her with a blank stare. Later that day, she noticed Jessica whispering something in Elizabeth's ear, as though they were talking about her. She became enraged again. That night, she taped the drawing back together so Elizabeth would remember who she was. But then she made another drawing. Clearly, Jessica was poisoning Elizabeth's mind, and she had to be stopped. Jessica didn't come to school the next day. Elizabeth remembered Sarah again, and without Jessica in the picture, the two met up in front of the school and walked home together once again. They hung out like old times in Sarah's room. Sarah was ecstatic to have her old friend back. But when she went downstairs to get lemonade, Elizabeth discovered Sarah's drawings. As she flipped through the drawings on Sarah's desk, her life flashed before her. She saw drawings of their childhood, meeting up to walk home after school, a ripped photo taped back together. But it was when she saw the last drawing that her blood ran cold. She ran out of Sarah's house and down the street to Jessica's house, where she sprinted upstairs. She walked into Jessica's room, and there she saw her. Jessica was lying in bed with no mouth. It was the last drawing she had seen on Sarah's desk. When Sarah came back with lemonade for Elizabeth, she panicked. Her drawings were strewn about, and Elizabeth was gone. She knew that Elizabeth would never forgive her, and she couldn't live with the despair of knowing that her best friend hated her. Then and there, she ripped up every drawing she'd made, erasing herself from Elizabeth's memory for life and putting Jessica back to normal. She went to school the next day, a stranger to her best friend, and she never drew again. This is the story of the scratches in the closet. Don't turn out the lights. It was the dead of night. The house was quiet as Stacy lay asleep down the hall from her parents. Suddenly, she awoke to the sound of something in her closet. She mustered up all her courage and slinked out of bed and down the hall, breaking into a run to get to her parents' room as quickly as she could. Groggy, her father followed her toward the closet to investigate the noise. The two of them slowly opened the closet door, but nothing was there. Stacy slept peacefully the next few nights, until she was woken up again. This time, the sound was different. From behind the door, she heard a rhythmic scratching like someone carving into wood. The door opened just slightly, and through the crack, she saw two red, glowing eyes. The scratching continued. Scared she'd be seen, she lay still, pretending to be asleep until the morning. When the sun was up, the noise was gone. She grabbed her dad to check the closet. On the inside of the door was lettering, in a strange kind of language she couldn't understand, scratched into the wood. Stacy's dad was shaken. He installed security cameras all over the house. They locked up all the doors. They closed every window. Nothing would get in or out without them knowing. Stacy slept soundly that night until she heard the scratching again. Unable to stay put, she bolted. The family fled outside and called the police. The cops searched the whole house. Then they reached Stacy's room. In the back of the closet, they discovered a hole. It was scratched through the wall and led to nowhere. It was dark and cavernous and deep. Where did it lead? What beast had made it? Would it come back? Stacy's dad had the hole boarded up and covered with cement, ensuring that nothing would come in or out again. But Stacy never slept the same again. If the thing found its way in once, couldn't it find its way in again?
The disembodied voice.
It was a hot spring night in Florida. Chrissy had just gotten home from school and settled down to do her homework in her old wooden house. It had been in the family for over 100 years, and it creaked and groaned as the winds blew. To Chrissy, they were the familiar sounds of a house full of love, one that never used to be silent. She fondly remembered her grandmother cooking, bashing pots and pans in the kitchen. She'd yell, "Chrissy Lou!" the nickname she'd given her when dinner was ready. But the house was quiet after school now. Chrissy settled in her room and began her homework, waiting for her mom to get back home. Her dog sat beside her. Chrissy had just finished her first math problem when she heard the door slam downstairs. Mom must be home early. Chrissy called down to her. "Mom?" There was no response. Probably just the wind, she thought. She shrugged it off and continued her homework. An hour passed. She'd almost finished her first assignment when she faintly heard the sounds of pots and pans clanging downstairs. She hadn't heard Mom come in the door. "Chrissy Lou," a voice called from downstairs. "1 second," Chrissy responded, finishing up her final math problem. "Chrissy Lou," the voice called again. Chrissy closed her books and walked downstairs, calling her dog to follow. But he wouldn't budge. She shrugged it off and walked downstairs and into the kitchen. No one was there, but what she saw sent a chill down her spine. Every pot and pan in the house had been stacked neatly in the middle of the room. Cabinets lay open and empty. The side door flew open beside her. In the doorway stood Chrissy's mom, groceries in hand. But if she was only just getting home, who laid out the pots and pans? Mom looked around at the scattered pots and pans, confused. "You helping me cook tonight, Chrissy Lou?" "I didn't do this," replied Chrissy as she and her mom looked around the kitchen. "Then who did?" asked her mom. "Chrissy Lou, dinner's ready. Chrissy Lou."
The woman in the well.
Each year, Rachel's mother would drop her off at her grandma's house for their yearly visit. Grandma lived down a long dirt road, miles from neighbors, tucked away in a beautiful forest. At night, Rachel would take Grandma's dog Harry out for a long walk in the woods. As she clipped on Harry's leash and stepped outside to begin their walk, Rachel's phone buzzed. It surprised her. She didn't usually have service so far away from town. An unknown number had sent her a text. "Come to the well," it read. She tried to respond and ask who it was, but her message wouldn't go through. She shrugged it off. It was probably a wrong number anyway. Harry pulled her along the dirt road, picking up a scent. She allowed him to lead her as she looked up at the beautiful moon through the trees. Suddenly, Harry stopped. He began growling at what was in front of him. Looking around, Rachel realized she was in unfamiliar territory. She'd never walked this way before. She strained her eyes to see what Harry was barking at up ahead. There stood a large stone well in the middle of the pathway. She'd never seen it before. Curious, she crept toward the well with her cell phone flashlight and peered down to the bottom. But the well had dried up. All she could see was a bit of wet dirt and darkness. "Hello?" she called down playfully, listening to the echo bouncing back at her in the blackness. Her cell phone buzzed again. It was another text, but this time it was a picture of her. She jumped back in shock, tripping over a tree root, her phone flying in the air and shattering down beside her. She and Harry ran back toward the house. Her grandma tried to calm her. The well was old and dried up, she explained. In fact, it was odd she stumbled across it tonight. Contractors were coming tomorrow to cement it over. Rachel tried to show her grandma the picture she'd been sent, but it had disappeared. Her grandma made her some tea and Rachel fell asleep on the couch. Early in the morning, she was awoken by the sound of a cement truck backing up and her cell phone ringing incessantly. Half asleep, Rachel picked up her shattered phone and held it to her ear. "Hello?" she answered.
"Come to the well,"
said a voice on the other line.
"They're burying me."
Rachel leapt up and ran as fast as she could, but she was too late. The cement truck was driving away and a pile of gravel lay where the well had been. Hurriedly, she picked up her phone and dialed back the number. It rang. Then she heard a ringing on the other line. The ringtone emanated from the ground deep, deep below her, buried in the darkness. Until the ringing stopped.
"Hello?"
The maid in Suite 23.
Zach and his mother could barely see the road ahead as they drove home from their family holiday. They couldn't see more than a foot in front of their car as the snow fell down like sheets on the window shield. Tired and scared, they breathed a sigh of relief when they saw a sign up ahead for a place to wait out the storm. The Inn at Mudford. They'd spend the night and finish the drive in the morning when the storm had passed. The old inn smelled like moist wood and mothballs and felt eerily empty. They were greeted by an old innkeeper. He informed them excitedly that they were his only guest, and so he'd give them his favorite suite to stay in. He led them to Suite 23. He showed them the first room. It was large and luxurious, with a king bed and large windows. Then he showed them down the hall to the second room, where Zach would stay. It was smaller with a twin bed. "Back when people used to travel with staff," the innkeeper explained, "this is where the maid would sleep." Once he was done with his tour, the innkeeper bid them goodnight and left the room. Zach got ready for bed. That night, Zach was awoken by a faint knock on the door. "Turn down service," a voice faintly called from beyond the closed door. "No, thank you," responded Zach. But then he heard the knock a second time. Zach stood up frustrated. What kind of maid visited in the middle of the night? He opened the door, but no one was there. Perhaps he was dreaming, he thought. He closed the door, locked it, and got back into bed. But something strange happened to Zach as he slept. When he awoke, all his clothes were neatly folded and put away. His bed was made around him, and his hair was carefully combed. He gathered his things and went to the front desk. Mom was already in the middle of checking out, clearly losing patience with the old innkeeper as he filled out his paperwork by hand. She went to get the car as Zach waited with the bags. The innkeeper silently stood behind the desk watching Zach as he stared out the window. The innkeeper thanked Zach for his stay. "It can get quiet around here with just me and the maid who died 200 years ago." A chill went down his spine. Zach hurried his bags outside. The maid couldn't be 200 years old. That was impossible. He Googled the inn at Mudford, trying to find answers. Headline after headline popped up. "The maid who haunts the Mudford Inn. Mudford Inn, the most haunted inn." Suddenly, Zach knew who knocked on his door. He knew who kept the innkeeper company. And he knew who tidied up his room in the middle of the night. It was the maid in Suite 23, who died 200 years ago.
The traveling doll maker.
The story took place in a very small village a long, long time ago. Little William walked to school along a familiar road when one day he passed something strange. In an open field that had long remained empty stood a traveling doll maker's caravan. The caravan was breathtaking, displaying realistic, lifelike, beautiful little boy and girl dolls arranged neatly in colorful rows. William stopped and stared at the dolls, mesmerized, when the doll maker stepped out from behind his dolls. "Do you like my creations?" asked the doll maker. "They're beautiful," responded William, unable to look away. "Will you make me one?" "No," said the doll maker. "They're far too valuable." William pleaded and pleaded with the doll maker. He'd said he'd steal. He'd sell all his possessions. He'd do anything if only the doll maker would just make him a beautiful doll. Finally, the doll maker responded. Alright, but each of these dolls is based off of someone I know. They're my greatest joy. If I were to make one for you, you'd have to give me a gift that's equally as valuable in return. Anything! The doll maker smiled wide. Bring me back the most valuable thing in your home, and I'll make you a doll. I don't have anything of value, but my father might. I'll make you a deal then, said the doll maker. Tomorrow morning, bring me your father's greatest joy, and I'll make you a doll. They shook hands. That evening, William ran home after school. He searched his father's office for the perfect thing to bring back to the doll maker, but he was scared his father might notice if something too valuable went missing, so he looked for something he could fool the doll maker with. He found a golden painted rock on the bookshelf. His father would probably never notice it was missing, and the doll maker would never know it wasn't his father's greatest joy. Proud of himself for his clever trick, William walked back to the doll maker in the morning. He handed him the rock with anticipation. "This is not your father's most prized possession," said the doll maker, throwing the rock to the ground. "I do not like liars. If you want me to make you a doll, come back with your father's greatest joy." That night, while his father was at work, William searched high and low for the most expensive thing he could find. He opened the safe to find solid gold cufflinks. He surmised they must be worth a fortune. Surely the doll maker would want these. The next day he returned to the doll maker with cufflinks in hand. "Is this what you believe to be your father's greatest joy?" asked the doll maker. "Yes," said William. The doll maker examined the cufflinks. "I still don't believe you," he said. "And now I'm growing angry. I leave in the morning. This is your last chance. Tomorrow you will bring me your father's greatest joy, if you want me to make you a doll." Growing desperate, William ran home with his cufflinks as the sun went down, hoping to find what the doll maker required. He burst into his father's office to find him home from work, toiling away at his desk. "Where were you, son?" asked his father, smiling. "I was worried. What would I do if something happened to you?" A chill went down William's spine when he realized what he'd just heard. You see, his father's greatest joy was him, and he couldn't very well give himself to the doll maker. He resolved to go back to the shop in the morning and tell the doll maker the deal was off. The doll maker was packing up his shop as William approached. "I'm sorry," said William, as he looked one last time at the beautiful dolls. "I cannot give you my father's greatest joy, after all, because my father's greatest joy is me." "Oh, but you can," said the doll maker. His face turned hard as stone. "That's how I make all my dolls." William's blood went cold when he looked at the dolls again, finally seeing them clearly. Every doll had realistic, terrified eyes like children trapped, frozen, and scared. He tried to turn and run, but his body stiffened. It was too late. The doll maker had his new doll, and William's father lost his greatest joy. The caravan traveled down the road to a new town, this time carrying William, just another doll on a shelf.
Evil drawings.
Ever since Sarah was young, she always had a power she kept secret. Whatever she drew came true. Every day she'd play with her best friend Elizabeth. They'd play on magical creations that came straight from Sarah's imagination. But as the girls got older, they grew apart. Sarah threw herself deeper into painting while Elizabeth played sports and started hanging out with her friend Jessica more often. However, the two still maintained a tradition of meeting up in front of school and walking home together. Until one day, Sarah waited outside for Elizabeth, and Elizabeth never came. And then it happened again the next day. After days and days of Elizabeth not showing up, Sarah confronted her at school. "Why won't you walk home with me?" she asked. "I walk home with Jessica now. It's no big deal. Sometimes things change." Sarah cursed at Elizabeth and screamed hateful things. Heartbroken, she ran home. She grabbed an old drawing of the two of them and tore it in half. The next day at school, when Sarah went to apologize to Elizabeth, Elizabeth didn't recognize her. She simply looked at her with a blank stare. Later that day, she noticed Jessica whispering something in Elizabeth's ear, as though they were talking about her. She became enraged again. That night, she taped the drawing back together so Elizabeth would remember who she was. But then she made another drawing. Clearly, Jessica was poisoning Elizabeth's mind, and she had to be stopped. Jessica didn't come to school the next day. Elizabeth remembered Sarah again, and without Jessica in the picture, the two met up in front of the school and walked home together once again. They hung out like old times in Sarah's room. Sarah was ecstatic to have her old friend back. But when she went downstairs to get lemonade, Elizabeth discovered Sarah's drawings. As she flipped through the drawings on Sarah's desk, her life flashed before her. She saw drawings of their childhood, meeting up to walk home after school, a ripped photo taped back together. But it was when she saw the last drawing that her blood ran cold. She ran out of Sarah's house and down the street to Jessica's house, where she sprinted upstairs. She walked into Jessica's room, and there she saw her. Jessica was lying in bed with no mouth. It was the last drawing she had seen on Sarah's desk. When Sarah came back with lemonade for Elizabeth, she panicked. Her drawings were strewn about, and Elizabeth was gone. She knew that Elizabeth would never forgive her, and she couldn't live with the despair of knowing that her best friend hated her. Then and there, she ripped up every drawing she'd made, erasing herself from Elizabeth's memory for life and putting Jessica back to normal. She went to school the next day, a stranger to her best friend, and she never drew again.
The principal.
As Gretchen sat with the other freshmen on their first day of high school, she could tell something about Middle Heights High was different. But what Gretchen noticed the most was how strangely well-behaved the students were. They were smiling and polite and almost too calm. Compared to the upperclassmen, the freshmen were unkempt, loud, and even a bit rowdy. Principal Richards welcomed them, and after a speech about how excellence is expected at Middle Heights High, he led the student body in singing the fight song. Middle Heights High forever, in unison we learn together. We're all bound for life, secrets safe and held so tight. Very quickly, Gretchen noticed that her classmates started to change. One by one, they began to adopt the smiling, polite, eerily calm demeanor of the upperclassmen. The hallways got quieter as students walked silently from room to room. Gretchen found herself appreciating the last few rambunctious and loud classmates she had left, like Chad Thomas. But that ended one day during first period, when Chad made a joke during Mrs. Woodrow's class and she sent him straight to detention. When he came back, he wasn't the same. Suddenly, he seemed like everyone else. His hair, usually messy, was perfectly combed. His jacket was clean. He had on a rigid smile and his eyes were blank. Something was happening in detention that was making the students change. As the days went on, Gretchen struggled to fit in. While she worked diligently in Mrs. Woodrow's class, she felt her classmates staring at her, suspicious of how she didn't fit in. As she felt their eyes on her, she got more and more nervous, and she dropped her pen on the floor. Mrs. Woodrow immediately spun around with glee, maniacally smiling in a way Gretchen had never seen before. It was like she'd been waiting for Gretchen to mess up. "Detention!" she screamed. Terrified, Gretchen grabbed her things and walked out of class. But as Gretchen passed Chad's desk, he reached out and grabbed her hand. "Don't go," he mouthed. She walked into the hallway and slowly toward the exit, ready to book it when she got outside those school doors. Suddenly, Principal Richards appeared in the hallway, blocking her way out and motioning her toward the detention room. There was no getting out of it. "Welcome to detention," Principal Richards said as he pressed play on a TV at the front of the room. She stared at the door, trying to figure out if she could make a run for it, when she found her eyes being drawn toward the screen. There were flashing lights, beautiful music, and she watched the whole thing. After that day, Gretchen fit in just fine.
The Wandering Woman.
Brother and sister Mark and Jess walked down the street on their way home from school. The two were so engrossed in talking about their day that they didn't notice the old woman standing in the sidewalk up ahead, staring right at them. "Hello," she said, startling them. "I don't mean to alarm you," she went on. "I'm simply looking for the library. I need to return my book and I can't seem to find where to go." Something about the woman made the hair stand up on the back of their necks. She was quiet and small. She wasn't scary, but But something wasn't right. The library's back the way you came, just down the road, around the corner and to the right. Darn it, she said, frustrated. She'd have to go back the way she came. As she got upset, Mark and Jess felt the air around them grow colder. Jess offered to help. We're going that way. How about I bring your book to the library? The woman smiled widely. Thank you so much. That would help me a lot. She handed Jess the book. It was hot to the touch. The woman thanked them and they parted ways. Feel the book, said Jess to Mark. It's burning up. He turned around to see if the old woman was still there, but somehow she was already gone. They picked up their pace and headed toward the library, ready to return the book and get home. But when they rounded the corner, they saw it. Where the library had been was a smoking pile of ash. Pieces of singed paper fell down around them. Mark caught one. At the top of the page, he read the title, Stranded. Then he read the title of the book, Stranded.
The babysitter.
There once was a little girl who hated being alone. One cold and rainy night, her parents were running late for an event, but the new babysitter hadn't arrived yet. The little girl begged her parents to stay, but they were in such a rush that they left anyway. The little girl sat alone in her house that felt big and scary without her parents. She jumped at every creak and clutched her stuffed animals tight when it thundered outside. Suddenly, there was a knock, knock, knock at the door. She breathed a sigh of relief and rushed to let the babysitter in. Standing there with no umbrella was a very small woman. And oddly, despite the rain, she was totally dry. I'm here to take care of you forever and ever. And then she smiled, a smile that was so wide it went up to her ears. The little girl was nervous about having such a strange babysitter, but at least she wasn't alone anymore. The girl started playing with her stuffed animals, and for a moment she forgot all about the babysitter. But when she looked up, the babysitter was standing over her, staring with her giant smile. The babysitter then took her hand and led her to the hallway where all the family photos hung. As they slowly walked from photo to photo, the little girl got more and more afraid. In each picture, her parents had been replaced by the babysitter. I'm here to take care of you forever and ever. The little girl pulled her hand away and ran to get her stuffed animals, but they weren't where she left them. She frantically looked in her room, but they weren't there. She even went down and looked in the creepy basement, but her animals were nowhere to be found. She tried to hold back her tears when she heard talking in the kitchen. She crept in and saw the babysitter holding her stuffed animals, telling each one, I'm here to take care of you forever and ever, before throwing them into the oven. The little girl screamed and ran up to her room and locked the door. She jumped into her bed and hid under the covers. But then she heard whispering coming from under her bed. The little girl slowly looked down. And there was the babysitter underneath the bed, smiling at her. I'm here to take care of you forever and ever. She reached out her long, veiny hands and grabbed the little girl by the hair, dragging her under the bed. But the little girl broke free and ran to the door. It wouldn't unlock. The babysitter slowly slid out and shuffled towards her, saying, forever and ever. Forever and ever. She grabbed the little girl and... Headlights blazed through the window. The little girl's parents were home. Her mom and dad rushed into the house. They'd come back early because the babysitter had called, saying that she was sick and couldn't make it that night. They called out for their daughter, but there was no response. Terrified, they ran through the house, desperately looking for her. But if they would have looked a little more carefully, they would have seen that there was a new photo on the wall. A photo of the little girl surrounded by all of her stuffed animals, which were now burned and deformed from the oven. And the little girl was crying in the photo because standing over her was a small woman in tattered old clothes with a wide smile, who would take care of her forever and ever.
The cemetery.
On a cold, dark night, a boy was trying to find his way home when he realized he had stumbled into a cemetery. He frantically looked for the exit, but around every turn was just more graves. Exhausted and scared, he slumped down in front of a small grave and started to cry. Suddenly, a strange light caught his eye, and he looked up to see a figure approaching. She was carrying an old lantern as she made her way through the graves. The boy asked the stranger to help him find his way out. The stranger looked down on him. She promised him that if he would listen to the stories about 3 different graves without running away, she would help him find his way home. The boy wiped away his tears and followed the stranger. She led him through the graveyard to a large, ornate grave and began the first tale. There once was an old man who was terrified of death. He used his considerable riches to turn his house into an impenetrable fortress, where no one could get in and cause him harm. One day, while checking the locks in his fortress, the old man fell and broke his leg. He called for help, but because no one could get in, he died from what should have been a minor injury. Now, he's doomed to haunt his own tomb, warning off anyone who gets too close. The boy rolled his eyes. He knew ghosts didn't exist and thought the stranger was just trying to scare him. He took a step closer to the grave. Suddenly, with an unearthly wail, the ghost of the old man appeared, broken leg and all. He wanted to run away as fast as he could, but he knew he still had to hear 2 more stories. The stranger ushered him to the next grave in the oldest part of the cemetery. There once was a strict school teacher who taught children in an old classroom in the middle of the woods. One day, when a storm was approaching, the children all begged to go home. The storm raged, blowing out the lanterns that lit the classroom. The children ran around frantically and bumped into the schoolteacher, spilling ink all over her blouse. The storm grew worse and worse until it blew away the schoolhouse, killing the schoolteacher and all the children in the process. In penance, the schoolteacher is now forced to wander the cemetery for eternity, helping children find their way to the afterlife. Then, the stranger opened her jacket, revealing an old-fashioned blouse covered in black ink. The boy realized the stranger was the ghost of the schoolteacher. He almost ran away, but he was so cold and tired, so he mustered up his courage and followed the dead schoolteacher to the last grave. It was the same small one she'd found him at. She began the final tale. Once there was a boy who thought he'd live forever. His parents warned him to always come home before dark. One moonless night, he lost track of time and found himself headed home in total blackness. He wandered the woods for hours, completely lost, until finally he saw a light up ahead. He ran to it, only realizing too late that the light was actually the headlights of a truck. He was killed instantly. But even then, the little boy refused to believe he was dead. He wandered the cemetery each night, looking for a way home, until he could finally accept his death. The schoolteacher set down the lantern, and the boy saw the name on the gravestone. It was his name. The school teacher offered her hand to the boy, but instead of taking it, he ran away, screaming, "He wasn't dead! He wasn't dead! He wasn't dead!" The next night, the lost boy was trying to find his way home again when he realized he had stumbled into a cemetery.
The magician.
There once was a boy who loved magic, but he didn't believe in it. He thought magic was simply a matter of tricks that could be mastered. Each day, his little sister waited for him at the bottom of the rickety attic stairs, begging to be his magician's assistant. She believed in magic, which annoyed her brother. But the boy would simply climb down the stairs, brush past his sister, walk straight to his room, and slam the door. She begged and begged for him to teach her magic. One day, the boy finally agreed. He walked toward his bedroom. His sister followed behind, excited. But then, he slammed the door in her face. "Ha ha ha, I made you disappear," he said through the door. The little girl gave up on her brother and found company with the old blind woman across the street, who surprisingly had some magic tricks of her own. Every afternoon, she would teach the little girl, until one day, she mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind a magician's box with a note for the girl that says, "A powerful trick that will even impress non-believers." She rushed home to the attic to tell her brother, interrupting his concentration. He scolded her, but was intrigued and followed her to the magician's box. The girl told her brother she would allow him to use it, but only if he let her be in his act. The boy reluctantly agreed. As the children lifted the box, they noticed a dusty portrait of the blind woman in her youth, wearing a black top hat, the kind a magician wears. The portrait stared at the children with glowing eyes. The whole way home, the boy couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The siblings set the magician's box down in their backyard. The girl, excited to finally do magic with her brother, climbs into the box. Still annoyed, the boy shuts the lid with the same force he used to slam his bedroom door the day he pretended to teach his sister a trick. "I wish you would actually disappear." And in the dark part of his heart, he meant it. He counted to 3, then opened the box. It was empty. Somehow, on her very first try, his sister had succeeded in hiding herself in the box. Why hadn't she revealed herself? He tried the trick again and again, but the box remained empty. The boy called out to his sister. Where was she? The boy spent the entire afternoon searching the house for his sister. She was nowhere to be found. Helpless, the boy ran across the street to the old blind woman's house. The windows were dark, except for the glowing eyes in the portrait. He ran back home, feeling again like he was being watched the entire way. The magician's box was still empty, its lid swinging open and shut with the wind. Night fell, faded into day and back into night, again and again. The boy had no idea how long it had been since he made his little sister disappear. Or was he the one who had disappeared? Finally, the boy laid the magician's box on the ground and climbed into it. He was so tired, but he'd stay awake to keep watch in case his little sister were to appear. The boy's eyes drooped shut. Darkness. "One!" screeched his little sister's voice. The boy gasped. His eyes shot open. After a moment, the lid to the box opened. "Ta-da!" sang the little girl, presenting her brother in the box. The boy looked around the backyard. It was summer again. It was almost dusk. Dazed, the boy begged his sister for an explanation. Where'd she gone? Where had he gone? What happened? "You're not the only magician around here," his sister said, as she bowed deeply to an imaginary audience. Her eyes glowed.
the prankster.
There once was a boy who would terrify his teacher with fake snakes, horrify his little sister with monster masks, and petrify his friends with blaring bullhorns. Every time he pulled a prank, he would hear his family and friends scream, which made him laugh and laugh. The prankster's friends were fed up. They decided they needed to give him a taste of his own medicine. They lured him into the cemetery one night, knowing he wouldn't be able to resist a ghoulish adventure. At the cemetery, his friends taunted him. "I bet you're too chicken to spend 10 minutes in that spooky tomb." But the prankster knew what was up and was determined to prove that he wouldn't get scared. He marched right into the tomb and set a 10-minute timer. It was dark and smelly and full of cobwebs and critters. And more than once, the prankster had to remind himself that nothing scared him. He reached an opening where there were large gravestones, and he took a seat. He would wait here until the time ran out. 8 minutes to go. When he looked up, he saw an old woman floating in the air, glowing as if lit up from the inside. "Welcome to my home," the woman continued. "My name is Winifred Williams. This is my home. You're welcome to stay a while." The prankster was impressed with this eerie illusion. There were no strings attached, no speakers or mic. He couldn't seem to find any tricks of the light. How are they doing this? He thought to himself. It's as if Winifred really is a... 10 minutes were up, but before he could leave, Winifred floated towards him. "Would you like to stay a while?" she asked. The prankster tried to appear confident as he rushed out of the tomb. But before he exited, he looked back to see Winifred faintly waving at him until she faded away. He took one step out of the tomb, and blam! A skeleton jumped out at him. His friends surrounded him, howling with laughter. "We got you! You were so scared!" the prankster had to admit. They got him good. His friends showed him the cheap plastic skeleton on a string that had given him a fright. The prankster admitted defeat and told his friends that Winifred was really a scary prank, and the skeleton was just the breaking point. "Who's Winifred?" his friends asked. And it was then that a haunting realization came over the prankster. He looked back at the tomb. Etched in the stone it read, "Here lies Winifred Williams, 1801 to 1880. The terror returned to the prankster's face as her last words echoed through his head. "Would you like to stay a while?"
Happy birthday.
From the moment she opened her eyes and her parents said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she knew her 8th birthday was going to be a great day. She got a special breakfast with all of her favorites, pancakes and berries and 3 kinds of juices. She ate in a hurry, and since it was her birthday, she was allowed to have seconds. After all, the birthday girl gets what the birthday girl wants. When all her friends came over for her birthday party, the house filled with laughter and fun. The birthday girl was so excited that they were all there to celebrate her special day. She was thrilled to see a gigantic pile of presents and greedily ripped off the wrapping paper of each one. There were games, dolls, and cool new toys. She got everything she asked for. The birthday girl gets what the birthday girl wants. Finally, they brought out her cake and 8 candles were lit. Her family and friends sang happy birthday and told her to make a wish. The birthday girl shut her eyes and thought really hard. What's the one thing she wanted more than anything else? "I wish it was my birthday again tomorrow," she thought, and then blew out the candles, all 8 of them. As her friends began to leave the party one by one, all the excitement of her special day began to fade away. She was sad that she had to wait a whole nother year for her next birthday. That night, when she closed her eyes, she thought about how amazing it would be if it were her birthday again tomorrow. The next day, she woke up, and to her surprise, the first thing she heard was her parents saying, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She thought it was a joke. She sat down for breakfast, where there were pancakes and berries and 3 kinds of juices, with seconds, if she wanted. She didn't understand what was happening and was too excited to care. Suddenly, her friends showed up, and the party started anew. When her parents brought out the cake, she was finally certain her wish had come true. This time, she noticed, instead of 8 candles on the cake, there were 9. She didn't think about it too much. She was having too much fun. After the birthday song was sung, and it came time to make another wish, she thought, "I wish it was my birthday forever!" And as usual, the birthday girl gets what the birthday girl wants. The next morning, she again woke up to her parents saying, "Happy birthday, sweetheart!" She went down for her birthday breakfast, but something was different. Instead of pancakes, a plate of eggs was sitting in front of her. When she complained, her parents looked confused and explained that she said pancakes were just for little kids. The birthday girl thought this was strange, but that was just the beginning. When her friends showed up, they all looked so different. Some of them were complete strangers. The birthday girl caught a glance of herself in a mirror and couldn't believe what she saw. She'd grown 2 years older in 2 days. This was not what the birthday girl had wanted. This time, when she blew out her candles, she wished for everything to return to normal. That night, she struggled to stay awake. If she didn't fall asleep, she could make it to the next day, right? But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, she was overtaken with drowsiness and lulled into a deep sleep, waking up again to, "Happy birthday, sweetheart!" Another year older. With every new day, she saw her friends change. Her teenage years flashed before her over the course of a week. She saw her parents grow old, and one day, they weren't there anymore. Soon she was surrounded by her own family, people she could not remember meeting. And as she had every day for the last few weeks, when it came time to make a wish, she begged and she pleaded to not have another birthday tomorrow. The next morning, like every morning, she wondered, had she finally gotten what she wanted? Was her special day finally over? Then she heard, "Happy birthday, Grandma!" And she knew it was her birthday. All over again.
The video game.
There once was a boy who was obsessed with video games. From the moment he woke up until the moment his parents made him go to bed, he would sit in his dark bedroom killing enemy after enemy. He never played a game that he couldn't beat, until one day, a strange game appeared on his screen. A game that he didn't remember buying. In it, you were a strong hero with a sword, running through a medieval village, slaying ugly little goblins. But as the boy got farther in the game, more and more hordes of goblins attacked, until they eventually overwhelmed him. Then they would laugh, a high-pitched goblin laugh, mocking him. The boy became consumed by the challenge of killing every last goblin. But even though he spent every moment he could playing the game, it was never enough. The goblins always won. He needed more time to play. When his parents came to wake him up for school, he pretended to be sick so he could stay home and play the game. He played the game all day and all night. The next morning, his eyes had heavy bags and his skin was sickly pale. His parents told him to stay home from school another day, so he kept on playing. For 2 days, the boy didn't eat or sleep or get out of bed. All he did was destroy laughing goblin after laughing goblin, becoming more and more obsessed with each kill. Finally, as the sun rose on the third day, he defeated the final horde and won the game. Before he could celebrate, the screen went to black. Then, a single goblin appeared on the screen, laughing at him. The boy tried to get up to get a closer look, but his legs wouldn't move. He looked down, and to his horror, his legs were disintegrating into tiny little pixels. He tried to scream, but before he could, his whole body pixelated, and he felt himself being sucked into the screen. When the boy came to, he found himself staring at his darkened room. He slowly turned around to see a medieval village. He was inside the game. Now he could play forever. But before he could hunt for goblins, he heard a clicking sound behind him, like controller buttons being smashed. He turned around and looked closer through the television screen. It wasn't his darkened room. It was another kid's room. A kid who was staring intensely at the screen, mashing buttons on her controller. The boy was confused. If she was the one playing the game, why was he inside of it? The game only had one hero, and they couldn't both be in control. With a growing sense of dread, the boy grabbed a silver shield and looked at his reflection. Staring back at him wasn't the hero's strong face. In fact, it wasn't a face at all. Just a pair of large, red eyes surrounded by fur. He was a goblin. There had to be some mistake. He shuffled around, desperately looking for some way out of this nightmare. Then suddenly, he heard boots pounding towards him. The hero rushed through the village, sword in hand, headed right for him. The boy cried out to the girl, begging her to stop playing. But the only sound that came out was a little goblin laugh.
The bottom of the lake.
It was a beautiful day by the lake. There were picnics, games, and laughter all around. A group of children played by the water. They dared each other to swim past the warning signs to the deepest part of the lake and bring back a handful of mud to prove they could reach the bottom. Only one girl had the courage to take the plunge. And sure enough, she marched right into the water. The other kids watched in astonishment as she swam past the signs warning swimmers. No lifeguard on duty. No swimming past this area. And finally, danger of death. She reached the middle of the lake. There was no bottom in sight, only darkness. She looked back at the kids, now only specks on the shore. She reminded herself that she wasn't scared. She took a huge gulp of air and swam down to the dark, mucky water, full of slimy plants and fish that brushed past her. She kept swimming. Strangely, the farther down she swam, the brighter it got. And even stranger, as if by magic, it became easier for her to hold her breath. She finally saw the bottom of the lake. As she reached out to grab a handful of mud, what she discovered was unbelievable. They looked like some kind of fish people, and there were a lot of them. They had scaly skin, gills, and webbed hands. They were playing games, and everyone was happy. The surprised girl let out a gurgly yelp. Immediately, all the fish eyes were on her. Before she could move, one of the fish people waved her over, and the others gave her a gurgly, "Hello, welcome, come play." She waved back to the fish people, and then raced to the surface to tell the other kids about what she saw. She excitedly explained about the fish people, but they didn't believe any of it. She hadn't even grabbed the mud from the bottom of the lake to prove she'd been there. The children taunted her for lying. They told her she should go play with her new fish friends as they left to play somewhere else. Who needs them anyway? Thought the girl. I have new friends who do want to play with me. And with that, the girl ran back into the lake, swam into the deep, and through the mucky water to where the fish people played. They welcomed her back. but the magic of her lasting breath started to fade. She quickly scooped up a handful of mud and waved goodbye to her new friends. Their friendly faces contorted into vicious smiles, revealing rows and rows of tiny sharp teeth. The fish people began to surround her.
Don't go. Stay for lunch,
the fish people said as they moved in closer. But the girl couldn't hold her breath any longer. She swam as quickly as she could towards the surface, but the fish people chased her. She glanced back to the crowd of hungry-looking creatures, moving closer and closer. Whop! A webbed hand grabbed her ankle.
Help!
She screamed into the water, using the last of her breath. The fish person pulled the girl down into the water. She thrashed and swatted at the creature, losing her handful of mud in the process. She was so close, she could see the surface of the water. The girl kicked her leg free with all the strength she had left and swam to the shore as fast as she could. The other kids noticed the out-of-breath girl. "What's the matter? Your fish friend's not playing nice?" She looked at them hauntingly, and with a dreadful chill in her voice, she said, "You don't have to believe me. Just never, ever go to the deep."
If you like to see us win, subscribe to the EyeImposter and Seyelent Assassin.